In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to use a really neat add-on that helps you to light the scene by interactively placing lights on a surface by clicking on that location. This is an add-on that's been developed by a fellow named Leonid Altman. He contacted me in order to help sort of test it out and see if it would really work as a full-fledged add-on, and it's really awesome to work with. I have a scene where I have my little material tester and I don't have any of the lights on. I don't have anything that's producing illumination, but I do have cycles turned on interactively. So all you do is you right click and then you invoke add light. Look at that. I can now just move the cursor where I want the light to appear, and it figures out where the light needs to be in order to produce that light right there. So I'm going to come over and do it again. I'm going to add another one for this side, and you can see how it sort of figures out where the light needs to be. Once you've placed the lights, you can still edit them. They're just standard lights. If I want to come over and say move this light closer to the scene, I can just press G and then Z, and I can move it a little bit closer in, and then I can continue to operate on it. So if I come back over into my 3D viewport on the right side, bring up the context menu, I can invoke adjust light, and then I can continue to move that around and place it where it is that I want. If I right click over here in light operations, I can come over into preferences, and then it gives me initial parameters. So when it creates the light, it says from the click point, I want the light to be about 40 inches away, and I want the size to be about 12 inches. So you can come in and set those according to the parameters that you need for the scale of your scene. It's also driven by a node setup in part, so you can come in and customize the color temperature, and it's also got a feathering mechanism, which I'll show you a bit more of in just a minute. Let's look at another feature that allows it to intelligently place lights. So what I'm going to do is go into render mode, enable a light, and I'm moving it around, but you're going to notice as I get down, it's sort of darkening up. Well, we can see over here the light, because of the angle of the click point relative to the view angle, is being put down below the ground plane, and I don't want that to happen. So let's remove that, bring up the context menu, come down to preferences, and we're going to say smart ground detection. And now when I come over and add a light, that doesn't happen. And you can see how it prevents the light from dropping down below the ground object. It detects that there. But it may be that you happen to have, say, a ground object in this case that is smaller. If I come back in and do an adjustment, well, now it drops below the ground plane. So this is where we would come back into preferences, and we would say use manual ground level, and it's just going to be 0 inches above the ground plane along the z-axis. Okay, so that's what it does. Now when I come back in, let's do adjust. It brings the light up so that the light does not drop below that ground level, and it's a smart feature. So you can see how awesome this is in being able to add lights, and I can very quickly and easily add lights into the scene in a way that I happen to like them. About like that. Very, very easy. Let's come in now and actually do a little bit more proper illumination on a particular scene. Once again, I don't have any lights, but I have made a light collection so that with that being selected, the lights get dropped into that location. So let's turn on interactive rendering, nothing appears, bring up the context menu, and let's do add a light, and it appears right there. Now this is where I would come in and I would look at the size of my scene, the scale of my scene, and I would come in and I would determine with preferences, do I need my light to be closer or farther? Do I need its size to be larger or smaller relative to the scene scale? And it's got an initial power adjustment that you can have set and an initial spread, but these basic parameters can be adjusted once you've set the light in the scene. So I've got one that I like right here, but what I'm going to do is bring up the context menu, and there is an adjust area light size, And I'm just going to increase that till I get it to about 40 inches, and I kind of like it right like that. So this is where I would come over, and I'm going to right click again, and let's add another light, and I want to add sort of a rim light off to the side, right about like that. Let me move it over so I can see here. See, in this particular case, I didn't want it to try and prevent any dropping below zero, below the z-axis. I really needed it in this case to drop below that, but I could have prevented it from dropping below that. So let's come in and do an adjust light size. I think I want that to be just a little bit larger. So it's sort of studio lighting. Now for the lid that's sitting on the ground, I'm going to add a light that will primarily affect that. So let's add another light here. You can see how easy it is to come in and just sort of find that light until you kind of get the gradient. I kind of like it right like that. So that was easy. Now let's do one for the top. So let's do another add light for the top. And there we go. But now we've got this issue where maybe it's just a little bit too bright. So we could move it back in the scene, or we could just come over here for this particular one and we could drop its intensity back. But now we have this situation where we've got this really strong illumination on the ground plane. I'd really rather not have that reflect, and so this is where we can use one of Blender 4's new features. It's the light linking function. I have the light that's casting this sharp reflection on the ground, so I'll come down to the object properties for it, and then we come down to shading, and I come down to light linking, and I click new, and I have a ground object. I simply click, hold, and drag and drop that into the light linking. And right now, by default, what we're doing is telling that light to only reflect on that particular object, but I want it to be reversed. I don't want it to reflect on that object, but I do want it to reflect in everything else. So I click that. Now it reflects on the objects, but it doesn't cast that really strong reflection on the ground plane. So now I'm going to make some adjustments. Want to come over to the light that's off to the side, and I'd like to maybe change its color. So what he's done is built in a couple of these controls right into the primary node. So I'm going to change this to Kelvin of 4000, which will sort of warm that up. And I do think that maybe I want to decrease the intensity just a little bit. For this top lid, it looks like it's a little bit too bright, and I'd like more of a gradient effect on there. So I'm going to show you another way that you can move a light relative to a surface. Bring up the context menu, and we're going to adjust the light. As I move it across the surface, tap the spacebar key, and it will anchor it to that point. So you can see I'm able to move the light to the side to get more of an artistic gradient effect across the surface. Then I think for the light that is affecting this lid that's sitting on the ground, I'd like to shift this to a cooler temperature. So I'm going to take its Kelvin rating up to 8000. And then for this front camera that's producing this strong frontal illumination, I'd like to make an adjustment to it using the feathering function. So let's pan this around. I will turn on the interactive renderer. We need to come over to object properties, and in ray visibility, I'm going to turn it on so the camera can see it. It's got a kind of a sharp edge to it. So in feathering, we're going to take this up to 100%, and it kind of feathers it. In order to make this a little bit more visible, I'm going to come over to exposure under film, and I'm going to drop it way down to 0.25. You can see that that really helps to sort of blend the edge of it. And so for surfaces where you want that little bit of a softer appearance, this will help with that. But you can also come over to the tilt functions, horizontal. You can bias the gradient in one direction, or you can bias it in the other. And that can be really useful for artistic purposes. Likewise, we can do that top to bottom. So I think I'll just take this feathering up to 100% and return exposure back up. So that's just a really nice small artistic adjustment you can make.